Hello, this is author Donald Allen Kirch, back with yet another story centered around the strange and the unusual. There is an old saying that home is where the heart is. What if the heart beating within the spiritual center of our home was an evil one? What if that unknown force behind the creaking of the house, the snapping sound of the settlement, and all of that were from a malevolent force out to attack and possibly hurt us? Let us enter a home in New York and learn for ourselves. This is Stranger Than Fiction.
Forget the world you know. Enter a bizarre dimension where the strange and unusual guide your imagination towards the unimaginable. Life is stranger than fiction in these true stories, where the ordinary is replaced with the extraordinary. Explore strange legends, weird myths, and odd folklore. The facts are laid before you to examine. You're invited to draw your own conclusions on these true stories of the paranormal.
On a rather mild November night in 1974, at around 6:30 in the evening, a small New York town's perspective upon the world suddenly changed. 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. entered Henry's Bar, a local watering hole, and proclaimed with an ashen face, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." Some in the bar, having known DeFeo, gathered up the courage to walk with him just a few blocks down the street to a Dutch colonial home located at 112 Ocean Avenue. The home had belonged to the DeFeo family since the early months of 1965. They were all well known, and the family was liked. Upon entering the home, a few of Ronald DeFeo's bar friends were horrified to learn that the young man had indeed been correct. His parents were dead, and it appeared to be murder. Someone had made an emergency call to the police, demanding a unit to further investigate. When fully searched, the house contained 6 bodies. All were killed in their beds. The victims had all been shot with a lever-action Marlin .336 caliber rifle. By all evidence, they had been murdered at or around 3:15 a.m. of that same day. The parents, Ronald DeFeo Sr. and Louise DeFeo, had both been shot, twice. The children, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew, all appeared to be resting in bed. In fact, all the victims within the house were found resting upon their stomachs. There was a slight suggestion which made some believe that both Louise and her daughter Allison had been the only two awakened by the murdering assault, but this theory is just that. How is it possible that 6 people could remain asleep while the others in their house were being shot with a loud and powerful hunting rifle? 112 Ocean Avenue is within a close community of fashionable homes. No one in the surrounding area heard a single shot. The Suffolk County coroner found no drugs or alcohol within the bodies of those killed. Upon discovery of his murdered family, Ronald DeFeo Jr. stated to the police that his father had been involved with some local mobsters, and that he was certain that if they knew that he was still alive, they would come after him. DeFeo was immediately placed into protective custody and taken down to the local police station. After several interviews, inconsistencies in his story, and within the timeline surrounding the murder, Ronald DeFeo's innocence was questioned. The following day, he confessed. He had killed his entire family. He told detectives, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." 112 Ocean Avenue would later be known as the house in the Amityville Horror. Even before the famous novel, and before the controversial stories, the property upon which the house had been raised had always been considered bad. During his trial, DeFeo tried to plead insanity. His defense lawyer told stories of an argumentative family and of a confused son who tried to ease himself off his heroin and LSD trips. There have been reported cases of DeFeo hearing voices ordering him to commit the crimes. of strange images of demons and evil faces taunting him during the night. DeFeo once claimed that before the killings, a man with black hands gave him the lethal weapon to start killing with. Although interesting, one must also acknowledge that DeFeo himself has changed his stories several times. There are as many versions of what happened as there are Amityville horror movies. All the ghost stories didn't work. On November 21st, 1975, DeFeo was found guilty and was sentenced to 6 consecutive 25-to-life terms. He is currently being held within the Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Beekman, New York. All his appeals to the State Parole Board have been turned down. Still, the murders held within them some abnormal details. All 6 victims were found in their beds, lying on their stomachs. All appeared to be peaceful and could have awakened quite easily upon hearing the sounds of a rifle being fired. It was this simple fact that no drugs had been found within their systems that had made police and locals puzzle over the case. From ballistic tests, there is no evidence of a silencer ever being used or that the rifle in question had the fittings needed to have one. There was a theory that DeFeo had an accomplice, but no evidence has come forth supporting such a notion. DeFeo has been known to be both charming and demanding, constantly threatening to sue those he cannot subjugate. Then came the cold winter of 1975. Just 13 months after the horrible murders that shook Amityville, George and Kathleen Lutz had made a humble offer of $80,000 for the house. Needless to say, the offer was instantly taken by the broker handling the property, but, by state laws, both had to be informed of the house's horrible history. Upon further thought, neither George nor Kathleen considered the matter a serious one. Having only been married for a couple of months, the Lutzes needed a place to help start their new family. Kathleen had noticed a small sign hanging from the front yard lamp, which had read, "High Hopes." With her 3 children from a previous marriage, Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa, she was hoping for the best. The Lutzes moved into the home on December 23, 1975. What followed next, as reported by the Lutzes in their book, were 28 days of parapsychological horror unequaled in the realms of ghostly attacks. Upon moving into the house, most of the personal belongings of the DeFeo family had been included with the price of the home. So, if one believes in psychometry, the belief of inanimate objects absorbing the energies around them, then 112 Ocean Avenue had been fully charged. Learning of the house's dark past, a friend of George's insisted that the house be blessed. Mr. Lutz, knowing a local Catholic priest, asked the man to take on the task of placing his new home upon a more peaceful and spiritual path. So it was on the day the Lutzes had decided to move into their home, the priest arrived to do his sacred duty. While in the backyard enjoying a private moment with their children, the priest started his blessings. What happened next has been debated to this day. While in a room Kathleen had decided to use as a sewing room, the priest heard a rather masculine voice ordering him to get out. There was accompanied with this order a foul smell and a rather physical slap upon the priest's face. The priest left without announcing his presence to the Lutzes. Later, the man telephoned George and Kathleen, warning them to stay out of the sewing room as much as possible. The sewing room, it was later discovered, had been the bedroom of Mark and John Matthew DeFeo. From that moment on, the Lutzes encountered several, if not questionable, experiences. George had been constantly awakened in the course of the night to the sounds of the front door opening and slamming shut. Upon investigation, he only saw their dog Harry asleep peacefully upon the front room rug. The Lutzes' children had also begun sleeping on their stomachs, in the same way that the dead bodies in the DeFeo murders had been found. George discovered a small hidden room around 4 feet by 5 feet behind the shelving in the basement. The walls were painted red, and the room did not appear in the blueprints of the house. The room came to be known as the Red Room. This room had a profound effect on their dog Harry, who refused to go near it and cowered as if sensing something negative. There were cold spots and odors of perfume and excrement in areas of the house where no wind drafts or piping would explain the source. George would hear what was described as a German marching band tuning up, or what sounded like a clock radio playing, not quite in frequency. When he went downstairs to investigate the noise, it would cease. George realized that he bore a strong resemblance to Ronald DeFeo Jr. and began drinking at the Witch's Brew, the bar where DeFeo was once a regular customer. A 12-inch crucifix hung in the living room by Kathy revolved until it was upside down and gave off a sour smell. George tripped over a 4-foot-high china lion, which was an ornament in the living room, and was left with bite marks on one of his ankles. George saw Kathy transform into an old woman of 90. He said, quote,
"Her hair was wild, a shocking white, and face of a mass of ugly wrinkles and lines. Saliva was dripping from a toothless mouth."
Missy would sing constantly while in her room. Whenever she left the room, she would stop singing, and upon returning she would resume singing where she had left off. Upon several occasions, Kathleen would feel herself being embraced by unseen forces. The house was plagued with swarms of flies in the middle of winter. George would find himself waking up at 3:15 a.m. each morning with an overwhelming urge to check his boathouse. A horrific, demonic face had made its presence known to both George and Kathleen while George was tending to a fire in the back of their fireplace. Half the demon's face looked blown away as if by a rifle. The young daughter, Missy, claimed to have an imaginary friend named Jody, a demonic pig capable of changing its size. On one January morning in 1976, a trail of gigantic cloven hoof prints had been spotted in the snow just outside the house. On January 8, 1976, realizing that something was against them, both George and Kathleen performed one of two blessings upon their house. With a silver crucifix, the two entered each room of their home, reciting the Lord's Prayer, asking for peace to come to their home. While doing this, each heard several agitated voices begging them to stop what they were doing. The second blessing, which took place in mid-January, was so frightening and indeed so horrific, neither ever fully explained the events, not even in their book, stating that it was just too frightening. Although it is rarely mentioned, the Lutzes did try once to leave their home for a while, heading toward Deer Park, New York, to stay with Kathleen's mother. While trying to relax, the phenomenon had followed them, suggesting that a simple night at the in-laws would solve nothing. After a final night of screaming demons and green slime oozing from the walls of their home, George and Kathleen Lutz took their children and dog, leaving on January 14, 1976. As a form of therapy, George had made both himself and Kathleen recite over 45 hours of audio accounts regarding their experiences at 112 Ocean Avenue. Upon hearing of the tapes, the editor of a local newspaper introduced the Lutzes to author Jay Anson, who thought their story had potential. The book, The Amityville Horror, has sold over 10 million copies and is in numerous editions. The title, most people believe, had been derived from the classic H.P. Lovecraft story, The Dunwich Horror, which had first been published in 1929. There are those who claim that this story and all its players were made up in order to sell books, that the tragedy of the DeFeo murders was used to capitalize upon for monetary gain. As someone who has had his own sanity questioned after being attacked by a ghost myself, I can sympathize with the Lutzes. With Ronald DeFeo, not so much. At least, in their episode, the Lutzes took no human lives. There hasn't been a one of us who, upon purchasing a home, haven't pondered about those who have lived there before us. Looking at a particular piece of wallpaper, or while remodeling a kitchen, haven't we all stopped to realize that others have left their mark here before? Only those who have entered a new home are spared these haunting thoughts. Then again, new homeowners may want to consider the land upon which they reside. It has been known to create some interesting moments in the field of hauntings as well. Even after I had been attacked by a ghost, I tried my best to remember a quote from paranormal investigator Hans Holzer. He said,
"A ghost is simply the residual leftovers of a person who has passed on. Ghosts can never hurt you. You see, they are just confused. Ghosts do not know that they are dead."
Do ghosts exist? Yes, I believe that they do. Ask yourself this three-part question. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in angels. If you believe in God, and if you believe in angels, how can you not believe in ghosts? For the skeptic out there listening, stay true to your path. Nothing helps the world of the unknown better than a strong dose of reality. In a sense, all skeptics in the world of the paranormal are the only hope that we have of seeking the complete truth. Now, as with all cases, such as the Amityville Horror, there is criticism. In the afterword of the Amityville Horror, Jay Anson states,
There is simply too much independent corroboration of their narrative to support the speculation that the Lutzes faked or imagined these events.
But some people remained unconvinced. Almost as soon as the book was published, in September 1977, other writers and researchers began looking into the events at 112 Ocean Avenue, and the conclusions that they reached were often at odds with those that appeared in Anson's book. The role of the priest in the story has been given considerable attention. During the course of a lawsuit surrounding the case in the 1970s, the priest stated that his only contact with the Lutzes concerning the matter had been by telephone. Other accounts say that the priest did visit the house, but experienced nothing unusual there. The priest gave what may be his only on-camera interview about the entire episode during a 1980 filming of In Search Of, a documentary series about the paranormal narrated by Leonard Nimoy. The priest's face was obscured during the interview to preserve his anonymity. In the interview, he repeated the claim that he had heard a voice that told him to get out, but stopped short of giving a paranormal origin. He also stated that he felt the slap upon his face during the visit. As with many areas of the Amityville Horror, the inconsistent accounts given by the priest about the extent of his involvement with the Lutzes family have led to more questions than answers. Kathleen Teresa Lutz died of emphysema on August 17, 2004. George Lee Lutz died of heart disease on May 8, 2006. Both had divorced in the late 1980s, but had remained on good terms. Neither ever suggested that it was the spirits that had caused them to grow apart. Ronald DeFeo Jr. remains within the gray walls of his correctional facility, refusing both interviews and comments unless he is paid for the honor. His family is presently entombed in Amityville's nearby St. Charles Cemetery. To this day, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue has remained a dead cell. There have been no other paranormal activities reported. Perhaps peace has finally come to our walls. For the future families that reside there, I certainly hope so. We have reached the end of our journey. Please join me again, where I will share yet another strange and unusual case file with you. It is my hope that Stranger Than Fiction will help you question what we call reality. If you would like to explore my work, you can go to my website at donaldallenkirch.com. That's Donald Allen, A-L-L-E-N, Kirch, K-I-R-C-H.com. One word, donaldallenkirch.com. It would be an honor to entertain you. Good night.